Sometimes self-love doesn't sound like affirmation. It doesn't sound like, I am enough, or I deserve better. Sometimes self-love begins as a whisper, a quiet, trembling voice that says, enough. Enough of the chasing. Enough of the overgiving. Enough of betraying your own needs in the name of belonging. Because the truth is, we often confuse love with endurance. We think that to love deeply means to tolerate endlessly. That to be a good person, a good partner, a good friend, is to stretch beyond our own limits, to accommodate what hurts us, to make space for what keeps taking. But there comes a moment, a very specific, almost sacred moment, when something inside you shifts. It doesn't happen with fireworks or clarity. It happens quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day. You wake up, you look at yourself, and you realize you've been holding on to something that's been slowly eroding you. And that small word, enough, rises like a pulse from the body. It's not a rejection of love, it's the beginning of it. You see, self-love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's fierce. It's a boundary, not a bomb. It's not about saying yes to yourself. It's about learning when to say no to what diminishes you. When I say enough, I don't mean that moment when you slam the door, pack your bags, and disappear. I mean the inner moment, the private one, when you finally stop making excuses for what's not working. When you stop negotiating your worth. When you stop believing that love must always come with pain. Self-love begins when you stop confusing being needed with being valued. When you stop mistaking attention for care. When you stop trading your peace for connection. And maybe that's the hardest thing to do, to disappoint others in order to stay true to yourself. Because for so many of us, self-worth was built on being useful, on being wanted, on being good. We were taught to measure our value in how much we could give, not how much we could receive without guilt. So when you say, enough, it's not defiance, it's reclamation. It's a homecoming to yourself. It's remembering that you are allowed to exist without earning it through sacrifice. Let me tell you something I've seen countless times. In love, in work, in friendship. People often reach the threshold of enough long before they admit it. Their body knows it. Their energy knows it. Their joy knows it. They start to shrink, to quiet themselves, to live in half measures. They tell themselves, maybe it will change. Maybe I can hold on a little longer. But the body doesn't lie. The body knows when it's tired of waiting to be chosen. And the word enough is the body's truth finding its voice. It's the mind finally catching up to the heart. Because the real act of self-love isn't grand. It's not the spa day, not the affirmation, not the retreat. It's the moment you stop abandoning yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. It's when you look at a situation, a job, a relationship, a friendship, and you realize that staying means losing the parts of you that make life worth living. And so you stop, you breathe, and you whisper, enough. And that whisper changes everything. It's the sound of a boundary forming where before there was only hope. It's the sound of a soul remembering its worth. It's the sound of love returning to its rightful place, within you. But I know this is not easy, because we live in a culture that romanticizes endurance. We praise the ones who stay. We idolize the ones who forgive endlessly. We call it loyalty, devotion, compassion. And sometimes it is. But sometimes it's just fear. The fear of being alone. The fear of being the one who leaves. The fear of being the one who says, I cannot keep doing this and call it love. We think that walking away makes us hard. But it doesn't. It makes us honest. Love cannot survive without honesty, not with another, and certainly not with yourself. So when you say enough, you are not rejecting love. You are redefining it. You are saying, I will no longer confuse love with longing, with suffering, with proving. You are saying, I deserve peace more than I fear loss. And that, my dear, is one of the most powerful sentences you will ever learn to say. When we finally reach our enough, we start to understand something profound. That love, true love, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't punish your truth. It doesn't make you small so that someone else can feel big. Love, when it's healthy, expands you. It lets you breathe. It doesn't need to be begged for or earned. It's mutual, respectful, alive. And so, self-love begins not in the mirror, but in the mirror moments. The ones where you see yourself clearly, sometimes for the first time in years, and you recognize the exhaustion in your own eyes. That's where it starts, with honesty, with one simple sentence that says, "I cannot keep doing this to myself." That's what enough really means. It's not anger, though sometimes it begins there. It's not bitterness, though you may taste that too. It's clarity. It's love stripped of illusion. It's you, finally choosing yourself, even if your voice shakes as you do. And maybe, for a while, you will grieve that choice. Because saying enough often means losing what you thought would last forever, but it also means gaining something you've long forgotten: your dignity, your freedom, your sense of peace. You learn that peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the refusal to participate in it. And when you arrive there, when you've said enough and meant it, you begin to feel something new. Lightness. Not because the pain disappears, but because the burden of carrying what's not yours finally does. That's the quiet magic of self-love. It doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. It doesn't make you invincible. It makes you authentic. And from that authenticity, a different kind of strength is born. One rooted not in resistance, but in reverence. Reverence for yourself. For the life that's still waiting on the other side of enough. You see, when you say enough, something extraordinary happens, not outside of you, but within. The noise begins to quiet. The performance starts to fade. You stop asking, "How do I make them stay?" and begin asking, "What do I need to feel whole?" And in that shift, you reclaim one of the most sacred forms of power, the power to choose yourself without apology. But let's be honest. Choosing yourself is not glamorous. It is not always celebrated. Sometimes it's met with silence, confusion, even resistance, because the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will not always celebrate the moment you find them. They might say, "You've changed," and you'll have to look at them and say, "Yes, I have," because that's what growth looks like. Growth is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the person you were before you learned to betray yourself. And in that returning, you may lose people, but you will never lose yourself again. You begin to notice something subtle but powerful. Your peace is no longer negotiable. You no longer beg for reciprocity. You no longer cling to crumbs of affection, calling them meals. You start to realize that the love you were seeking from others was, in fact, a reflection of the love you had been withholding from yourself. You see, so many of us spend years, decades, chasing love that feels like home. But we forget that home isn't found in someone else's arms. It's built in the quiet of our own hearts when we finally stop leaving ourselves behind. That's why enough is such a sacred word. Because it's not the end of love. It's the beginning of true belonging. And belonging is different from attachment. Attachment says, "I need you to feel safe." Belonging says, "I can be myself and still be safe." When you belong to yourself, you stop settling for half connections. You stop chasing people who only meet you halfway. You stop confusing potential with partnership. You begin to see that love without respect isn't love. It's dependency dressed as devotion, and you no longer have the appetite for it. That's the quiet revolution of self-love. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just closes a door gently and walks away. And yes, there will be grief. Grief for the relationship you wanted to work. Grief for the version of yourself that kept trying. Grief for all the time you spent explaining yourself to people who were never listening. But beneath that grief, there is something sacred unfolding, a soft but steady reorientation. You start coming back to yourself, piece by piece. You start remembering the small joys, the things that make you feel alive without needing anyone's permission, the sound of your own laughter when no one is watching, the freedom of solitude that doesn't feel like loneliness anymore, but like spaciousness. And here's the truth I've seen again and again. Self-love doesn't start with confidence. It starts with compassion. It's not saying I'm perfect. It's saying, even when I'm lost, I am still worthy of care. You begin to treat yourself with the same gentleness you once reserved only for others. You stop being the harsh critic of your own heart. You start being its guardian. And slowly, life begins to feel different. Not because everything around you changes, but because you do. You start noticing the people who meet you in your truth, not your performance. You start feeling peace in your own company. You stop needing validation because your worth no longer depends on external applause. That's the miracle of enough. It's a boundary, yes, but it's also an opening. It's the moment your life expands to fit the size of your soul. And here's the paradox. When you learn to say enough, love doesn't disappear. It deepens. It becomes more honest, more grounded, more alive. Because you no longer love from fear. You love from freedom. You no longer give to be chosen. You give because it feels true. You no longer stay out of habit. You stay because it's healthy. This is what I call mature love. The kind that doesn't ask you to disappear to be loved. The kind that doesn't punish you for your truth. The kind that honors your individuality as part of the connection, not a threat to it. But to get there, you have to let something die. The illusion. The illusion that love means control, that sacrifice means worth, that peace means compliance. You have to let those ideas burn away so that something real can grow in their place. And it's painful. Yes, but it's also profoundly liberating. When you finally stop betraying yourself for love, you discover a peace that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. A love that doesn't need permission. A wholeness that doesn't vanish when someone leaves. You become your own safe place. And from that safety, love becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a transaction, but a translation. A translation of who you are into the language of connection. Self-love doesn't make you selfish. It makes you capable. It allows you to meet others not from emptiness, but from overflow. You see, when you love yourself enough to say, enough, you stop asking others to complete you. Instead, you invite them to join you. There's a difference between seeking someone to fill your void and seeking someone to share your fullness. The first comes from fear. The second comes from freedom. And freedom, that's the soil where real love grows. But freedom is not found in rebellion. It's found in awareness. In the daily, deliberate choice to stay true to yourself, even when it costs you something. Because every time you say enough to what hurts you, you're saying yes to what heals you. Every time you set a boundary, you create space for something beautiful to enter. Honesty, peace, respect. Every time you walk away from what diminishes you, you move closer to what's meant for you. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that enough wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The moment you stopped surviving and started living. The moment you stopped performing love and started experiencing it, first with yourself, then with the world. That's the quiet revolution of a single word. Enough. When you begin living from that place, from the wholeness that comes after saying enough, something almost mystical begins to happen. You start to notice how the world rearranges itself around your boundaries. The same situations that once drained you no longer pull you in. The same conversations that once left you spiraling now pass through you like waves against rock. Because when you stand in your truth, you stop being available for chaos. Not because you're above it, but because you finally see your worth too clearly to keep renting space to your own suffering. And in that space, peace doesn't feel boring anymore. It feels like home. For many of us, that's the hardest adjustment, to realize that stability isn't emptiness. That calm doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you are no longer confusing adrenaline for connection. You are no longer mistaking emotional turbulence for depth. You start to crave quiet, not noise. You start to choose slow, not urgent. You start to recognize that love doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. I often think of it like this. There's a certain kind of love that burns like fire, intense, consuming, demanding. It sweeps you off your feet but often leaves you ashes. And then there's another kind of love, the kind that glows like embers, steady, warm, alive. It doesn't consume you, it nourishes you. Self-love, the kind born from enough, teaches you to tell the difference. You stop chasing the fire that burns, and you start tending to the flame that sustains. It's not that you become afraid of passion. You simply learn that passion without peace is just chaos wearing perfume. And that lesson changes everything. You begin to approach life differently, more slowly, more intentionally. You stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "What feels true?" You stop chasing people to prove your worth and start creating spaces where your worth is self-evident. That's what healing does. It redefines the pace of your love story. You move slower now, not because you're cautious, but because you're conscious. You've learned the cost of rushing, and you no longer want to pay it. But here's something important to understand. Saying enough doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you start loving yourself too. And when you include yourself in the equation, everything changes. You start giving without depletion. You start forgiving without erasing yourself. You start listening to your intuition, that quiet inner compass that always knew what you needed, even when you didn't trust it. It's like learning a new language, the language of your own boundaries. And boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges built with self-respect. They don't shut people out. They show people where the doorway is. They say, "If you want to be here, this is how we keep love alive, through respect, through awareness, through care." Boundaries are not ultimatums. They're invitations to healthy connection. When you understand this, you stop feeling guilty for needing space. You stop apologizing for needing peace. You stop over-explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And that, my dear, is a profound act of self-trust. You see, so much of our pain comes from one simple place. We don't trust our own knowing. We sense the truth, but we delay it. We hear the whisper of enough, but we silence it with hope. Hope can be beautiful. But hope without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. You can love someone deeply and still know that they cannot meet you. You can wish them healing and still walk away. You can forgive them and still choose distance, because love is not measured by how long you stay. It's measured by how honestly you live it. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step away, not in anger, but in clarity. Not as a punishment, but as a protection. Not to end love, but to preserve your soul. That is what enough teaches you, that your capacity to love should never exceed your capacity to respect yourself. And once you understand that, your entire relationship with love shifts. You no longer see endings as failures. You see them as forms of honesty. You no longer view solitude as punishment. You see it as restoration. You begin to understand that healing isn't about erasing your past. It's about rewriting your relationship to it. It's about remembering differently. It's about saying, "Yes, that happened, and I can carry it now without it carrying me." And one day, after all the heartbreak and the silence and the slow rebuilding, you realize something unexpected. You've become your own safe place. You no longer need to chase stability. You've built it. You no longer need to beg for understanding. You've found it within. You no longer crave to be seen because you finally see yourself. And that is what enough really gives you. vision. It clears the fog of confusion and people-pleasing and endless striving. It returns you to a simple, grounded truth. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to outgrow the things that once fit. You are allowed to stop surviving and start living. And maybe the people around you won't understand that at first. They may call it selfishness. They may call it distance. But that's only because they haven't yet learned the difference between control and care. You can love someone and still choose yourself. You can love someone and still say, "This no longer aligns with who I am." Because love without freedom is not love. It's possession. And when you say enough, you set both yourself and the other free. Free to grow. Free to change. Free to love again, differently, truthfully, expansively. That is the paradox of enough. It feels like an ending, but it's really a door into a new kind of life, one rooted in self-respect, grounded in peace, open to real connection. A life where love is no longer a battlefield, but a garden. And in that garden, you no longer water weeds just because you planted them. You tend to what grows. You let what withers go. Because now you understand that not everything that breaks your heart is meant to be repaired. Some things are meant to be released so that you can finally return to yourself. And that's when healing stops being an idea and becomes a way of life. It's not a destination. It's a daily devotion to honesty, to peace, to balance. Every day you wake up and ask, "What is true for me today?" And whatever the answer is, that is enough. When you start living from that grounded truth, the one born after the word enough, your world begins to change in subtle, powerful ways. Not because everything outside suddenly improves, but because you stop betraying yourself to hold it all together. You no longer chase what constantly slips away. You no longer fight for what refuses to meet you. You no longer confuse familiarity with fulfillment. You start realizing that peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop abandoning. And with that realization, a different rhythm returns to your life. A slower, steadier one. You breathe differently. You walk differently. You even think differently, less about why they did this, and more about what you are ready to live now. This is what I often call the calm after courage, because saying enough is brave, but learning to live in the quiet that follows, that's where transformation truly begins. In the silence after letting go, your senses awaken. You start to hear things you couldn't hear before, your intuition, your needs, your truth. You begin to see that love, when healthy, is not meant to silence you. It's meant to help you listen better, to life, to others, to yourself. And it's in this new awareness that self-love matures. It stops being a declaration. It becomes a discipline. You practice it in the smallest moments. When you rest instead of overworking to prove your worth. When you say no, not as rebellion, but as reverence for your own energy. When you stop explaining your boundaries like apologies and start living them as standards. You see, real self-love is not about perfection. It's about integrity. It's not about always feeling good. It's about honoring what feels right. And that requires discernment. Discernment is different from judgment. Judgment condemns. Discernment clarifies. It asks softly, "Does this nourish me or deplete me?" And it trusts the answer, even when it's inconvenient. That's where wisdom begins, not in the big realizations, but in the small, consistent acts of honoring yourself. You begin to notice that your relationships shift too. Some people fall away naturally, like leaves in autumn. Others deepen, like roots in fertile soil. The ones who truly see you, they don't fear your boundaries. They respect them, because your honesty gives them permission to be honest too. And that's the beauty of self-love. It doesn't isolate you. It refines your connections. It draws you toward relationships where love is not measured by sacrifice, but by mutual care. Where the question is no longer, what do I need to give to be loved? But, how can we love each other without losing ourselves? That's what mature love looks like. Two whole people choosing to meet in truth, not two broken halves clinging to survival. But to arrive there, you must first learn solitude, not as punishment, but as practice. Solitude teaches you the art of enoughness. It shows you that your own company can be soft, sacred, sufficient. It teaches you to sit with your silence and realize it's not emptiness, it's space. Space where life breathes, where ideas are born, where peace lives quietly, waiting for you to notice. In solitude, you start to rebuild intimacy, not with another, but with yourself. And this intimacy, this inner closeness, becomes your foundation for every relationship that follows. Because when you know how to be with yourself, you stop being afraid of losing others. You stop making choices out of desperation. You start loving out of wholeness. And from wholeness, love becomes freedom. Freedom to express. Freedom to change. Freedom to leave and still love. Freedom to stay and still grow. That's what self-love does. It frees you from the old equation where love meant losing yourself. Now, love becomes a choice, not a need. A joy, not a performance. A dance, not a duty. But I want to be honest with you. Even when you've said enough, even when you've learned your worth, there will still be days when the old patterns call your name. The mind remembers the comfort of chaos. The heart remembers the familiarity of pain. And healing isn't linear, it's cyclical. So, on those days, when you feel yourself slipping back into old habits of over-giving, over-apologizing, over-explaining, pause. And whisper to yourself, "No, I remember now. I've already said enough." Because healing is not about never falling back. It's about recognizing it sooner and choosing differently. You see, self-love is not an endpoint. It's a relationship. One that requires tending, listening, forgiving. You will not always get it right. You will falter. You will forget. But that's okay. Every time you remember, you return stronger. Every time you remember, you realign. Every time you remember, you deepen your intimacy with yourself. That's the rhythm of growth. Forget. Remember. Return. And with each return, the word enough becomes less a defense and more devotion. It stops being the voice of survival and becomes the language of peace. It's no longer, "I've had enough," but "I am enough." Not said to convince, but to confirm. That is the quiet evolution of self-love, when boundaries transform from walls into wisdom. When you no longer guard your heart out of fear, but guide it with awareness. When you stop fighting for love and start flowing with it, inward, outward, endlessly. And then one day, something tender happens. You find yourself in the same places that once broke you, and you don't ache anymore. Not because you forgot, but because you finally remember differently. You see the lesson, not just the loss. You see the becoming, not just the breaking. You see yourself, not as someone who was unloved, but as someone who finally learned to love truthfully. That's what enough gives you. Clarity without bitterness. Strength without armor. Love without illusion. You stop needing to prove your worth to those who couldn't see it. You stop rehearsing old conversations in your head. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. Because you've made peace with your own heart. And that peace is its own apology, its own closure, its own freedom. And in that freedom, you begin to love again. Not the way you used to. Not with desperation, not with conditions, but with awareness, with presence, with choice. You begin to love people not for what they can give you, but for who they become when they stand beside you in truth. You love because it expands you, not because it completes you. And that, my dear, is the ultimate transformation. Self-love becomes no longer a practice of protection, but an act of creation. You are no longer just healing from what hurt you. You are creating what heals you. Love, integrity, peace, wholeness. These are the quiet revolutions that begin the moment you whisper that one small, sacred word, enough. And though it begins as a boundary, it ends as a blessing. Because to say enough is to say, I will not abandon myself again. And from that moment on, everything you touch, every love, every dream, every breath becomes an expression of that promise.